Hey guys, Kevin, Life22. I promised you one once a week. It's been 10 days, I'm sorry. We're working on it. So, just got done with jujitsu, working out the body, and now working out the mind. I want to make this one of my journal entries as well as kind of like a book review. I'm almost done with Maps of Meaning. It's a Jordan Peterson. I think it's his second book. I didn't read his first one. I didn't realize. I thought this was his first book. So I'm on to those next. But what I wanted to do was, he had some great points in that book, and I wanted to break them down. And so I'm gonna do probably 3 different videos, probably one tomorrow, one the next day, in addition to today's. And so what he does is. And this is, I'm going to make this like a journal entry. I'm going to make this like I'm talking to myself, and I'll end up posting this video. And I'm just trying to break down these ideas. So he talks about, like, George, or is it Carl Jung, and he talks about Friedrich Nietzsche, and a bunch of great, like, philosophers and just people that great thinkers and guys that broke down stuff, and great psychologists and sociologists and things like that, and they had a lot of different theories, and but almost everyone, the first point I wanted to touch on was he talks about, like, some of the best ones were viewed as madmen in their inception, because the rest of the world didn't know how to view them, and they could see things as they were traveling down their path that was a greater, they could see things in a probably more clear to them, made the world a little bit more clear. And I wanted to kind of focus on that topic in general. If you've ever been stuck by yourself for a hot minute and thought about a topic, you can kind of work your way down like a rabbit hole, if you will. And so I kind of wanted to expand on that theory, that you can go through and have you can start thinking about a subject and then just work your way down. And it's kind of like the paths of life, right? So if you're traveling down a path in life, it's hard for me to hand gesture this, and just like the idea, following an idea and seeing where it takes you, right? So you start breaking something down, and then you might veer left, or it might fork, and you take a left path versus a right path. And the only downside to that is it opens your mind to travel down one of those paths. Now, I'm not saying you get on hallucinogenic drugs and do this. I'm saying, like, you could be stone cold sober. As I was listening to this book, and I was hearing this theory, and I was listening to other ideas that he unpacked in the book, and it's like, man, if you're on this path following an idea down a rabbit hole, if you don't have leave a breadcrumb trail, right, or draw yourself a map on where you started and take notes, or have a vivid memory on how you got to where you are, then I really feel like then you could turn around and people would view you as nuts, because they don't know how you got to where you are or where you're coming from. You could be, they're over here on a path, and you've taken this path, and so now you're trying to explain to them what you were doing, and they don't even know what path you're on. They don't understand where you're coming from because they're not on that path, right? They haven't traveled down that road. And I feel like this is like the example I gave, where you follow an idea down where it takes you, but then what happens when you do like the long term, right? The collective. You start collecting all sorts of ideas that you break down. You start having conversations with all sorts of people. Like Joe Rogan's a great example. He talks to tons of people. What happens is he's got to come back, right? Or recenter, or draw a map of where he came from. So it's to reference back, right? Like, oh, I took a right at the stop sign. Okay. And you give those references. If you don't give that reference, then nobody knows where you're coming from. So they don't know how to take you either. That's the other thing. Like, if we don't have a discussion, I might have a different political philosophy than you, but you don't understand how I got here, right? Like, I read this book, that book, this book, and they opened up my eyes, right? But you may have just read, this book. And a lot of people on the left nowadays, I mean, they read Karl Marx, and that's the only book they want to listen to. They won't read any, Thomas Sowell, for example. And so that right there, that kind of explains how they're like, you know what I mean? If you shield yourself away from absorbing all topics. I listened to Karl Marx the other day. I listened to his book. What is it? The Communist Manifesto. I wanted to see what it had to say, and I was glad that I know thy enemy, right? That was what my thought process was, and I was kind of worried that I'd be like converted, and that wasn't the case. I had enough other books that put me on a path in life that when I read that one, I was like, this road's a dead end. You know what I mean? I saw too many faults in it. But if you've only read that book, then everything else, it tells you, you know what I mean? Don't read anything else. And now you're following a faulted path. So that's what, I don't know, that's what, that was just an example. So if I read, in the past, since COVID started, I've read 35 books, right? So, or listened to them on Audible. So I've listened to 35 books. I'm actually listening to one right now. No, I'm not that much of a D-bag. And I'm not, I can't comprehend that much, right? To unpack an idea and then listen to a book as well. Just that idea, it strikes a chord, and then you kind of understand where a lot of people are coming from, or why, like, the more books I read, the further I feel like I'm down a rabbit hole. And then people wonder, like, why did Kevin make that reference? What? It's like, a lot of times I find myself like a Daniel Tosh joke. For those of you who don't know, Daniel Tosh was a stand-up comedian. And he used to start with the whole crowd understanding, and he would pinpoint a reference all the way down to the nitty-gritty details till he had one person in the audience laughing that followed him down that rabbit hole. And I feel like a lot of times I will be on a roll and I will end up being like a Daniel Tosh joke, where I'm just all the way down to to the bottom of the rabbit hole on a topic, and nobody else has followed along, and then people don't have that kind of attention span anymore, and they don't want to follow you down that rabbit hole, or they don't understand that you're down a separate rabbit hole because of your experiences or your knowledge that you've accrued in life. And that's the only fear that I have the more books I read, is that I will become so set apart from other people in my experiences intellectually that I'll want to talk to people, but people will be unable to talk to me because they won't understand where I'm coming from. And so I'm glad that I listen to Audible, and then I've been tweeting every book that I read, so you can kind of follow a path in which you can't get all my life references, you know what I mean, like life experiences that I've gained. But I mean, the YouTube channel, if I continue to post videos and kind of record my life, which is what we originally intended for the YouTube channel, was to do that. It kind of opens you up to understand and unpack me as a human being. And then so when I do things like run for office and run for the school board and run for alderman or someday governor and president, you'll be able to unpack and say, I know exactly who Kevin Doherty is because of this, and he's not this terrible guy that people paint, or he's not this he thinks this way, or he does that. These are his flaws, right? Like, okay, well, everybody has flaws, but then my flaws, and my strong suits, and this, and that. And whether you call me thine enemy or thine ally, it's good to have a good grasp on somebody that you're either going to listen to, follow, or even hate. I mean, you really should know the ins and outs. You should be able to predict their moves. Predictability's, I mean, that's a flaw of almost every human. So, I mean, but that was an idea that he brought in the book, using a lot of these greats, that every one of them, like Einstein was a kook, you know what I mean? Like, he would just hum to himself and walk down the street, like he's in his own world, right? Which is great. I mean, you get on those, alpha waves, or, and it's just drawing, and I don't know if this is the purpose of Jordan's book, but maps of meaning. So he's trying to take a bunch of different maps and put them together for you. Now, he doesn't say this out in the book, but this is my interpretation of it, that he takes the entire book and draws you a map. He's putting all these maps together and helps you connect them so that you can come to the same conclusions he has. and at least better understand your life. And I mean, there's a lot of things, and I'll get into a couple of them, like on the next video, tomorrow's video, that people just they don't understand, or that things get, life experiences have already been lived. So a lot of people put them into stories, myths, legends, maps, essentially, and tells you how they got there, where they are, something simplistic that a lot of people can get behind. And it just, I don't know, it makes sense. So, well, journal, YouTube land, thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow. I'm gonna just keep doing this. I'm just gonna come up with ideas to unpack, and I'm gonna come up with, my normal stuff. June 1st is right around the corner. We're gonna have a great June theme, and we won't be late this month. But as my father used to say, or still says, if no one were late, none of us would be here. And we will catch you guys tomorrow.